Captain Ward strode into the leadership workshop at camp with her usual blend of confidence and calm energy. The morning sun poured across the parade ground outside, but inside, the atmosphere hummed with anticipation. Junior officers fidgeted in their seats, eager for guidance, while seasoned officers exchanged knowing glances. A Marine known as much for her wit as her precision in the field immediately felt at home among the mix of nervous energy and restrained formality. She had risen quickly through the ranks, her reputation for intelligence, decisiveness, and perhaps most surprisingly, humor preceding her. From the very beginning, she had understood that military life demanded discipline, but leadership thrived on trust, connection, and sometimes a little levity. That insight had become her trademark. As she took her place at the head of the room, she noticed the sea of eager faces, young officers in crisp uniforms, straight backs, and nervous hands, each trying to measure up to the exacting standards of the Marine Corps. Smiled to herself, knowing that tension was part of the process, and she could ease it without losing credibility. "All right, ladies," and she began, her voice carrying authority tempered with warmth, "let's talk about leadership." She paused for dramatic effect, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "And yes," she added with a sly grin, "I may be a captain now, but don't worry, I have plans to outrank most of you one day. Consider this your official warning." The room erupted into polite laughter. Some officers snorted, while others shook their heads with amused disbelief. The humor was unexpected, and that was exactly the point. Moved among them as she spoke, gesturing with ease, her presence commanding without imposing. She shared anecdotes from her own career, carefully threading in moments of vulnerability and lessons learned. She spoke of the long nights on deployments, the unexpected chaos of exercises gone awry, and the delicate balance between authority and approachability. Through it all, her humor acted as a bridge, making her experiences relatable, even entertaining. Officers leaned in, intrigued by her storytelling, but also alert to the underlying principles she conveyed. She had always believed that laughter did not diminish respect. On the contrary, it built trust. Humor, she thought, was like a well-placed tool. It could diffuse tension, open communication, and reinforce unity. But she also knew it was a delicate instrument. One misstep, one ill-timed joke, and it could erode authority instead of enhancing it. Was confident in her timing, a skill honed over years of navigating military hierarchy with grace, humor, and unwavering competence. As the morning session progressed, encouraged participation. She asked junior officers to share their own leadership challenges, listening attentively and responding with thoughtful, sometimes witty commentary. Her laughter, light but deliberate, punctuated her feedback. It was infectious, and soon the room was alive with conversation, collaboration, and mutual respect. Officers who had arrived tense and uncertain now seemed animated and engaged. Thrived in this environment, feeling the pulse of the room as she guided discussion, nudged reflection, and offered perspective. But beneath her casual confidence there was awareness. The military world was structured, hierarchical, and often unforgiving. While humor could open doors, it could just as easily close them if misjudged. Knew she had to read the room, gauge the balance of authority and levity, and maintain a presence that inspired both trust and respect. Today, she thought, she had struck that balance perfectly, or so she believed. Her playful warnings about her future rank had been received with laughter and admiration. No one seemed to doubt her competence, and many seemed to enjoy her willingness to be approachable. Yet the Marine Corps was never entirely predictable. Had just concluded an anecdote about a deployment in the Pacific, illustrating the importance of improvisation under pressure, when she noticed a subtle shift in the energy of the room. Some of the senior officers had exchanged brief glances, lips pressed in thin smiles, eyes calculating. She didn't think much of it at first. After all, nuanced expressions were part of any military gathering. But a ripple of anticipation seemed to flow through the attendees. Whispers, barely audible at first, hinted at a special guest arriving soon. Confident and playful, continued without pausing, joking about a hypothetical promotion that might put her in command of the entire workshop. The young officers laughed freely at her quips, some snorting into their hands to stifle laughter. Humor worked like a charm, humanizing her while maintaining her authority. Her ability to mix credibility with entertainment was a rare skill in a world that often rewarded rigidity over personality. She believed firmly that leadership wasn't just about orders and titles. It was about influence, inspiration, and connection. If officers could respect her judgment while enjoying her wit, then she was achieving exactly what she wanted: an engaged, motivated, and attentive audience. But in the back of her mind, sensed that something, or someone, was about to shift the dynamics entirely. The murmur of expectation, the fleeting glances, and the subtle stiffening of posture among senior officers hinted at an impending change. She didn't know the details, but her instincts told her that the playful tone she had cultivated might soon meet a moment of serious authority. She allowed herself a private chuckle, imagining the potential irony. The captain who joked about outranking everyone, facing a figure whose mere presence could silence a room without effort. For now, however, she continued to guide the discussion, fully immersed in her role. Her stories flowed naturally, her humor punctuated moments of reflection, and she navigated questions with deft insight. Officers hung on her every word, captivated by her balance of professionalism and felt invigorated. This was the environment where she thrived. She was not only teaching leadership but embodying it, demonstrating that command could coexist with personality. She was in her element, the room alive with energy, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. As the morning session approached its midpoint, glanced around once more, catching the eyes of those who had been quietly observing her. The anticipation in the air hinted at a twist in the day, an element she could not yet anticipate. For now, though, she remained focused on her mission, to teach, inspire, and connect. Her laughter, bright and precise, filled the room, leaving a trail of warmth and engagement. To her, a defining moment was approaching, one that would test her ability to balance humor with authority and shape the trajectory of her career in ways she could never have predicted. The room was still buzzing with energy from Captain Ward's anecdotes and humor when the mid-morning break ended. Junior officers returned from stretching their legs, adjusting their uniform jackets, and quiet conversations about drills and assignments faded as resumed her leadership session. Her presence dominated the room effortlessly, a blend of authority and approachability. Officers hung on her every word, laughing at her well-timed jokes but absorbing the deeper lessons embedded within. She knew humor alone would not earn respect, and she carefully threaded guidance and insight into every story. Had a unique way of making her leadership lessons resonate. She spoke of resilience, the nuances of command, and the importance of empathy in difficult situations. She recounted moments during overseas deployments when small gestures, like acknowledging a Marine's quiet courage, transformed morale during tense missions. Her humor softened these lessons, but the officers recognized that beneath every joke lay a principle they could apply. Was deliberate. She wanted her team to learn that leadership required both decisiveness and humanity. As she encouraged participation, one of the junior officers, a nervous second lieutenant named Jackson, raised a question about handling difficult subordinates during deployments. Listened intently, nodding, her expression serious for a moment before letting her characteristic grin return. "It's simple, Lieutenant," she said, leaning casually against the table. "First, make sure you're more intimidating in the boardroom than they are in the barracks. Then make them laugh, but never at your expense." The room erupted in chuckles. The tension from the initial question eased, but the message remained clear. Leadership required both confidence and respect. Her ability to navigate these delicate moments was part of her charm, and it earned admiration from the younger officers. They saw her as approachable yet commanding, a rare combination that inspired both trust and loyalty. Even some senior officers exchanged knowing smiles. Had always been aware of the eyes on her, the subtle judgments that accompanied every remark she made. She understood the importance of reading the room, gauging the balance between levity and authority. In her mind, humor was a bridge, not a shield. But she was about to discover that even the most carefully measured bridge could be tested. During a lull in the discussion, a ripple of quiet conversation spread from the back of the room. Officers whispered in low tones, their voices barely audible over continued explanations about decision-making under pressure. She noticed the subtle shift immediately, senior officers straightening, a faint tension settling into their posture. She knew that something was about to change, but her confidence remained unshaken. She continued with her exercises, asking officers to role-play leadership scenarios. She moved from group to group, offering encouragement, constructive critique, and of course, witty commentary that drew smiles from the participants. Yet in the periphery, the whispers grew louder, a strange undertone of anticipation. Instincts told her that the special guest mentioned earlier was about to make an entrance. A few officers glanced nervously at one another, adjusting their jackets and shifting in their seats. Sensed it, but chose to focus on the exercise at hand, determined not to let speculation disrupt the workshop. Humor had given her confidence, but experience had taught her that attention to detail and presence of mind were the hallmarks of effective leadership. She maintained her composure, even as a subtle tension crept into the room. The young officers were oblivious to the change, laughing at a joke about a misfired drill exercise, when suddenly the atmosphere shifted palpably. The doors to the workshop opened quietly, and a ripple of instant respect swept through the room. Officers instinctively straightened, their laughter dying midair. In the middle of illustrating a point about adaptability, noticed the subtle shift immediately. She turned, eyebrows raised, and her voice caught slightly as she realized the source of the sudden tension. A figure, tall and imposing, had entered the room, the kind of presence that could silence even the most spirited gathering. It was Brigadier General Cole, a man whose reputation alone commanded absolute attention. Stories of his career were legendary, decades of service marked by strategic brilliance, unyielding discipline, and unwavering standards. His gaze swept the room, calm but piercing, and every officer instinctively registered his authority. Even the youngest lieutenants felt a sudden spike of nervousness. His heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but from a keen awareness that the dynamic of the room had just shifted irreversibly. Her humor, once a perfectly balanced instrument, now felt fragile under the weight of his presence. The Brigadier General moved with deliberate purpose, his steps measured and commanding. His eyes briefly rested on, and for a fraction of a second, the warmth of the workshop's laughter seemed to vanish. The room, moments ago alive with energy, transformed into a space of quiet respect and disciplined attentiveness. The officers felt the contrast instantly. A captain known for levity and approachability, now juxtaposed against the presence of a figure whose mere arrival demanded reverence. Recognized the subtle yet profound lesson embedded in the moment. Authority could not be joked about when faced with genuine, commanding power. Quickly recalibrated, her demeanor shifting with seamless grace. She straightened, masking the ripple of tension that threatened to surface. Her humor did not vanish, but it became controlled, respectful, and secondary to the lesson at hand. She allowed Brigadier General Cole to establish his presence, understanding instinctively that the room's focus now belonged to him. She observed the silent hierarchy in action, the unspoken acknowledgement that, while humor had their place, there were moments when pure command and respect took precedence. Cole's presence alone reminded of the delicate dance of military leadership. Humor could inspire morale, ease tension, and build rapport, but authority was absolute and non-negotiable. She reflected on her own journey. Years of hard work, determination, and strategic risk-taking had brought her here, yet every lesson she had learned now seemed to converge in this singular moment. The Brigadier General was not just visiting. He was testing, observing, and demonstrating, silently teaching a lesson without uttering a word. The room fell into a hushed attention as he began to speak, his voice measured, resonant, and commanding. He discussed leadership principles, the weight of responsibility, and the importance of maintaining respect while building camaraderie. Officers listened intently, absorbing every word. Despite the slight flutter of nerves, recognized the precision in his message. It was clear, subtle, and pointed, directed at no one, yet unmistakably meant for those who had underestimated the invisible power of authority, humor, and timing. As the Brigadier General spoke, his mind raced with reflection. She realized the profound impact of this simple, quiet exercise in observation. The room had transformed under his gaze, shifting from laughter-filled engagement to disciplined attention. Officers were no longer participants in a casual workshop. They were observers of in presence, authority, and leadership. Absorbed the lesson silently. Humor could only coexist with command when wielded with careful awareness, timing, and respect for the hierarchy. Even as the workshop continued, felt a subtle shift within herself. Her confidence remained intact, but it was now tempered with humility and a deeper understanding of the power dynamics that defined military life. She recognized that this moment, simple yet profound, would become a reference point for every decision, interaction, and joke she made in the future. Humor remained her tool, but it would now be wielded with discretion, precision, and a deep respect for the unseen authority that could silence an entire room with presence alone. By the end of the session, had regained her composure fully, engaging the room with controlled wit, while maintaining the gravitas demanded by Cole's presence. Junior officers left the session inspired and alert, carrying with them lessons of discipline, respect, and strategic humor. Herself walked away with an even stronger awareness of the balance required to be both approachable and authoritative. She understood deeply that leadership was as much about presence as it was about personality, and that day, the Brigadier General had demonstrated it in a way that no story or joke ever could. Captain Ward sat quietly after the workshop, her mind still processing the sudden arrival of Brigadier General Cole and the electric shift in the room. She replayed every detail in her mind, the subtle straightening of her peers' postures, the hush that fell over laughter, the weight of his gaze, and the precise cadence of his voice. For this moment wasn't merely an interruption. It was a reflection of the journey that had brought her here, and of the lessons she had learned along the way. It was a reminder that leadership was rarely about comfort. It was about presence, perception, and purpose. Story began far from the gleaming halls of camp, in a small neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio. Her parents were the epitome of blue-collar resilience. Her father worked long shifts at a factory, and her mother managed multiple jobs while raising 2 children. They instilled in her an unshakable sense of responsibility, perseverance, and integrity. Learned early that success required more than ambition. It required discipline, sacrifice, and an unwavering belief in one's ability to rise above circumstance. She grew up observing her parents navigate challenges with quiet determination, lessons she carried with her into every battlefield and boardroom. From an early age, exhibited a fierce curiosity and a natural talent for leadership. In school, she excelled academically, but was equally drawn to activities that demanded coordination, teamwork, and decisiveness. She often found herself stepping into roles where she guided peers, whether organizing group projects or leading debate teams. Her peers noticed not only her competence but her charisma, the subtle way she could inspire trust, encourage collaboration, and diffuse tension with well-timed humor. By the time she graduated high school, had already begun honing the skills that would eventually define her military career: intellect, empathy, and the ability to lead with confidence and authenticity. At 18, enlisted in the Marines. The decision was met with surprise by her friends, who assumed she would pursue college or a more conventional career path. However, the Marines represented an opportunity to challenge herself, to test her limits, and to serve something larger than herself. Boot camp was brutal as it was for every recruit, but thrived. She learned quickly, absorbing lessons not just about discipline and tactics, but about resilience under pressure. Her humor, initially a way to calm nerves and build camaraderie with fellow recruits, became a subtle tool of leadership. Even in the harshest conditions, she found that a well-placed joke could ease tension, foster unity, and inspire confidence. Her rise through the ranks was deliberate and impressive. By the time she earned her commission as a captain, had distinguished herself through a combination of intelligence, strategic thinking, and the ability to connect with those she led. Deployments overseas tested her in ways that required more than technical skill. They demanded judgment, emotional intelligence, and courage. Learned that leadership was rarely about making the perfect tactical decision. It was about inspiring trust, demonstrating reliability, and understanding the human element of command. She became known as a captain who could navigate crises with calm efficiency while keeping morale high, a rare blend that earned her both admiration and respect. Yet humor remained a defining aspect of her leadership style. She understood instinctively that humor could be a bridge between ranks, a tool to humanize authority, and a method to engage her subordinates without undermining her own credibility. But she also knew it was a delicate balance. A joke too far could erode authority. Levity in the wrong context could signal weakness. Had spent years perfecting the timing, tone, and audience of her humor. It was intentional, not impulsive. Every quip, every anecdote, every playful warning about her future rank was carefully calibrated to reinforce connection while maintaining respect. Humor was her ally, but one that demanded skill. His journey was also shaped by moments of vulnerability and failure. She had faced setbacks in her career, missions that went awry, exercises that exposed gaps in planning, and moments when she questioned her own judgment. Each experience became a lesson, sharpening her skills and fortifying her resilience. She learned to accept constructive criticism, to recognize the strengths and weaknesses of those around her, and to navigate the complexities of military hierarchy with nuance. These experiences instilled in her a profound understanding. Leadership was as much about self-awareness as it was about authority, and the most effective leaders were those who could balance empathy with decisiveness. The Brigadier General's arrival that morning reminded of these lessons in a visceral way. Cole's presence was a living embodiment of authority, experience, and command. Realized that no amount of humor or charisma could replace the weight of presence and the respect it demanded. She recalled similar moments in her past, times when senior officers had subtly corrected her course, moments when her own judgment had been tested, and instances when humility had taught her more than success ever could. Each experience had built the foundation for the captain she had become, competent, confident, yet acutely aware of the responsibilities her rank entailed. Also reflected on her motivations. Unlike some officers, she had never pursued rank for prestige or status alone. For her, leadership was a means to effect meaningful impact, to guide, inspire, and protect the Marines under her command. Humor, intelligence, and presence were tools to achieve that goal. The Brigadier General's silent test was a reminder that every tool in a leader's arsenal had its limits and required discernment. His challenge was to wield her gifts, wit, strategy, empathy, without allowing them to overshadow the demands of authority and respect. Her colleagues, too, played a role in shaping her understanding. Had always paid attention to the subtle cues of those around her, the way junior officers responded to encouragement, the way peers reacted to humor, the silent approval or disapproval of senior leaders. These observations had taught her that leadership was relational, not purely hierarchical. Command was earned, not demanded. The laughter that followed her jokes was not just amusement. It was a measure of trust, engagement, and influence. Yet she knew that trust could be fragile, easily tested by the arrival of someone whose authority was unquestionable. The Brigadier General's presence that morning crystallized all of his past experiences and lessons. She understood, in a way that no anecdote or exercise could convey, the interplay of humor, respect, and authority. Her mind traced back to her early days in Ohio, to the lessons from her parents, to the challenges of boot camp and deployments, to the moments of triumph and failure. Each thread converged in that moment, teaching her that leadership was not static. It was dynamic, situational, and deeply human. Humor remained a part of her, but now it existed alongside an even stronger awareness of timing, perception, and consequence. As the workshop continued, felt a renewed sense of purpose. She engaged the officers with careful attention, balancing her characteristic warmth with newfound precision. She asked questions that prompted reflection, guided exercises that tested judgment, and shared stories that highlighted both success and failure. Her humor, still present, was measured and purposeful, reinforcing connection without undermining authority. The Brigadier General's silent lesson had not diminished her voice. It had sharpened it, providing clarity on when to lead with levity and when to lead with unassailable presence. By the end of the morning session, sat back, observing the officers as they processed the exercises and discussions. She noted the subtle changes in posture, attention, and engagement, the hallmarks of a room that had absorbed more than just anecdotes and jokes. The Brigadier General's influence lingered, not as intimidation, but as a profound lesson in the balance of power, respect, and influence. Understood that humor could inspire, but authority commanded. Leadership, she realized, was the delicate art of knowing when to wield each, and how to maintain equilibrium in moments of both levity and gravity. Left the workshop with a quiet sense of reflection. She knew that this day, like many moments in her past, would become a reference point in her career. The Brigadier General had not needed to speak directly to her to impart a lesson. His presence had done the work. She smiled privately, acknowledging both the challenge and the opportunity ahead. Her backstory, the trials, lessons, and humor of her journey, had prepared her for this moment, and she now understood more deeply the responsibility that came with rank, presence, and the delicate balance of leadership. The hum of conversation in the workshop had barely settled when the double doors at the back of the room creaked open. At first, it was subtle, a footstep, the quiet shifting of weight, but it immediately drew the attention of a few officers. Their eyes flicked toward the entrance, and a ripple of awareness spread through the room like the faint beginning of a storm. Captain Ward, standing at the front, paused mid-sentence, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Something had changed, though she could not yet see the source. Her instincts, honed over years in the Marines, whispered caution. The room was no longer entirely under her influence. Then he appeared. Brigadier General Cole entered, tall and imposing, his uniform immaculate, medals and ribbons catching the soft morning light. His stride was steady, purposeful yet effortless, as though each step measured the room's energy and commanded respect without a word. Officers instinctively straightened, backs rigid, hands tightening at their sides. The air seemed to thicken, charged with a tension that demanded attention and silence. Mid-anecdote froze for a fraction of a second, her mind racing to assess the presence that had just entered. Cole's reputation preceded him. Stories of his strategic brilliance, flawless execution of high-stakes missions, and unyielding standards had been shared in whispers in barracks, lecture halls, and offices across the Corps. He was the kind of officer whose arrival was not merely noticed, it was felt. His mere presence reshaped the dynamics of any room, commanding deference without demand. For this was both a test and a revelation. Her humor, so carefully calibrated, suddenly felt delicate, almost audacious in its timing. The Brigadier General's eyes scanned the room, a slow, deliberate sweep that seemed to assess not just the room's layout, but the readiness, discipline, and awareness of everyone within it. His gaze paused momentarily on who felt the weight of it settle squarely upon her. The room, once animated with laughter and discussion, became hushed. Chairs creaked as officers shifted, some instinctively sitting up, others subtly adjusting their uniforms. Felt a flutter of nerves, a rare sensation for a captain who had faced the rigors of boot camp, deployments, and leadership crises. Yet this was different. This was presence. pure, undeniable authority that could silence a room without uttering a word. She took a deep breath, regaining her composure. Her mind raced, recalling every lesson, every anecdote, every subtle nuance of leadership she had practiced over the years. Humor, she reminded herself, was a tool, not a weapon. Timing was everything. She allowed her smile to soften slightly, maintaining her approachable demeanor while recalibrating the room's energy. She could not control the Brigadier General's presence, but she could control her response. That control was part of her training, part of what had allowed her to rise rapidly through the ranks. Cole's entrance was more than ceremonial, it was instructional. He moved to the front of the room, eyes still scanning, posture perfect. Officers instinctively oriented themselves toward him. Even the junior lieutenants, usually full of nervous chatter, felt a tightening in their chests. The Brigadier General's presence demanded a level of discipline, focus, and awareness that could not be faked. Feeling both challenged and exhilarated, realized this was a live demonstration of one of the core truths of leadership. Presence could speak louder than words, and respect was earned through action, composure, and authority. He stopped a few feet from the podium, his gaze returning too. For a moment, the room seemed to exist solely in the space between them. She could feel the silent scrutiny, the unspoken assessment of her abilities, judgment, and even her humor. Her playful quips from the morning seemed distant, almost incongruous against the weight of his demeanor. She understood, viscerally, that leadership was situational. The same behavior that inspired camaraderie with her peers could appear frivolous in the presence of a higher authority. Adjusted her stance, straightening her posture and letting her presence assert itself without words. The Brigadier General finally spoke, and his voice carried a calm but firm authority. It was measured, precise, and every word resonated in the room with the weight of experience. He spoke not to reprimand but to instruct, using clarity and brevity to make his point. His message emphasized the importance of professionalism, the delicate balance between approachability and authority, and the significance of timing in leadership. Even without addressing directly, the implication was unmistakable. Every action, joke, and comment must be weighed against the authority of the moment. Listened intently, absorbing every word. Her earlier confidence did not waver entirely, but it was tempered by a profound awareness of context. She realized that humor and levity, while effective tools in the right environment, required careful calibration in the presence of those whose authority was absolute. Her mind replayed moments from her career, deployments where timing and perception had dictated outcomes, exercises where authority and morale had intersected, and interactions where the wrong word could erode trust. This moment crystallized all those experiences into a single, vivid lesson. The room remained silent, officers collectively aware that they were witnessing an presence. The Brigadier General's gaze continued to sweep over them, subtle but purposeful. Could feel the shift in energy, the reorientation of attention, and the unspoken message that leadership demanded both confidence and humility. She understood that the Brigadier General was not there to diminish her, but to illuminate the distinction between influence and authority, humor and command. His presence was both a test and a teaching moment, and she felt privileged to be part of it. For the junior officers, the Brigadier General's entrance was transformative. They had arrived expecting a workshop led by a charismatic captain, and they found themselves in the presence of a figure whose reputation alone commanded respect. His humor and approachable style had warmed the room, but Cole's arrival reminded them that leadership was multidimensional. It required adaptability, awareness, and the ability to read both people and circumstances. Felt a surge of pride and responsibility. She realized that she was not merely a participant but a bridge between the Brigadier General's authority and the room's learning experience. As the Brigadier General continued his brief remarks, allowed herself a moment of reflection. She considered her upbringing, her training, her experiences in the field, and the lessons that had brought her to this point. She understood, in a profound way, that humor, while a powerful tool must always be tempered by awareness and presence. Leadership was not a single attribute. It was a symphony of skills, awareness, and character. Cole's entrance had transformed a routine workshop into a living lesson in the nuances of command, and absorbed every nuance with quiet determination. By the time the Brigadier General concluded his remarks, the room was transformed. The laughter, energy, and casual camaraderie of the morning had shifted into disciplined attentiveness. Officers, young and seasoned alike, had been reminded of the stakes, the standards, and the weight of authority. Standing at the front felt a renewed sense of purpose. Humor remained her ally, but now it existed alongside a heightened understanding of presence, timing, and respect. This was a turning point, a lesson that would echo throughout her career and shape the way she balanced wit, warmth, and authority in every leadership role she undertook. As Cole left the room, officers instinctively straightened, a subtle murmur of respect following him out the door. Exhaled quietly, a mixture of relief, exhilaration, and reflection. She had witnessed in real time the impact of presence, authority, and silent instruction. Her humor, her stories, her leadership style, all of it now existed in a new context. She had learned that influence alone was not enough. It must coexist with respect, perception, and timing. This moment, she knew, would become a defining memory, a point of reference that would inform every decision and interaction she faced in her rising career. Returned to the center of the room, her posture steady, her demeanor composed. She engaged the officers once more, guiding them through exercises with renewed focus. Her humor remained, now carefully calibrated, reinforcing connection without undermining authority. The room was alive again, but with a different energy, one that balanced engagement with attentiveness, approachability with respect. Understood that this balance was fragile but essential. Humor could inspire, but presence commanded. Leadership was the art of mastering both. The Brigadier General's entrance had changed everything. The room, moments ago filled with laughter and light-hearted chatter, had transformed into an arena of silent attention. Officers, from the most junior lieutenants to mid-ranking majors, instinctively straightened their posture. Even the walls seemed to hum with the weight of expectation. Captain Ward felt the shift immediately, a tangible, almost physical tension that reminded her of every moment she had spent under scrutiny in her career. She had faced countless inspections, high-stakes operations, and leadership exercises, yet this was different. This was authority distilled into presence, and it commanded absolute respect. His gaze followed Brigadier General Cole as he moved with quiet precision toward the front of the room. His footsteps, deliberate and measured, seemed to leave an invisible imprint on the floor. Every eye was drawn to him, every officer caught in the gravitational pull of his authority. Felt her pulse quicken, a mixture of exhilaration and apprehension. Humor, her usual armor, felt incongruous here. The playful quips and anecdotes she had shared just minutes ago seemed to hang awkwardly in the charged silence. She knew instinctively that she was being tested, not with words, but with presence. Cole's eyes scanned the room slowly, taking in each officer's posture, attentiveness, and expression. When they lingered briefly on, she felt a momentary shiver of vulnerability. Her mind raced through the morning, recalling every story, every joke, every laugh she had elicited. She had prided herself on being able to balance authority with humor, approachability with command. Yet here, in the presence of someone whose reputation alone commanded obedience, she realized the delicate line she had walked. Leadership, she understood now more acutely than ever, was as much about timing and awareness as it was about skill or charisma. The Brigadier General finally began to speak. His voice, calm yet resonant, carried throughout the room, commanding attention without raising volume. Every word was deliberate, measured, and precise. He spoke not to reprimand but to instruct, weaving lessons on professionalism, responsibility, and the importance of presence into a narrative that captivated the room. Leadership, he said, is not merely about rank. It is about influence, timing, and perception. A leader's every word, action, and gesture leaves an impression that shapes those they lead. His gaze swept over the officers once more, lingering subtly on. Even without addressing her directly, the message landed with pinpoint accuracy. Felt the unspoken correction sink in, the reminder that humor, while a powerful tool, could never eclipse authority. She reflected on her recent jokes about outranking peers, her playful quips during discussions, and the moments when levity had filled the room. They had been effective in building camaraderie, yes, but in the presence of someone whose authority was absolute, they were suddenly fragile. The Brigadier General was teaching a lesson in subtlety. Leadership required not just skill and intellect, but situational awareness and respect for hierarchy. Junior officers in the room absorbed the lesson alongside. Many were unprepared for the sudden gravity, having arrived expecting a standard workshop led by a charismatic captain. They now witnessed in presence, authority, and silent instruction. Felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for the learning environment she had helped create. Her humor had primed the room for engagement, but Cole's presence had demonstrated the weight of responsibility that accompanied every leadership decision. Together, the two styles, the approachable and the authoritative, created a profound learning experience. Thoughts drifted briefly to her career thus far. She recalled moments when she had underestimated the subtlety of authority, times when her humor or confidence had almost misfired, and instances when she had been humbled by a senior officer's gaze or reprimand. Each memory reinforced the lesson before her now. Authority could silence a room without words, and respect was not granted. It was earned. Straightened, absorbing the gravity of Cole's words, and allowed herself a moment of humility. This was not of her capabilities. It was a refinement, a sharpening of her understanding of what it meant to lead effectively. The Brigadier General's words continued, touching on resilience, the importance of example, and the necessity of maintaining credibility in all circumstances. Humor, empathy, and approachability are valuable, he said, but they must never overshadow the clarity and decisiveness required of a leader. Those you command look to you not just for guidance, but for assurance that you can bear the weight of responsibility without faltering. Listened carefully, feeling each statement resonate with her own experiences. She understood now that her jokes were not wrong, they were tools, but they must always be wielded with awareness of context, timing, and audience. Her peers reacted subtly, some nodding in silent agreement, others straightening further, absorbing the weight of the lesson. Felt a renewed sense of responsibility, not just to lead effectively, but to model the balance between approachability and authority that Cole had demonstrated. Humor would remain part of her leadership, but tempered by awareness, presence, and timing. She realized that the Brigadier General's silent observation and deliberate teaching style had been more effective than any direct critique could have been. The lesson was internalized, lasting, and impossible to ignore. As the room absorbed the silence and the weight of presence, reflected on her own journey, she had grown up understanding responsibility through her family's sacrifices, honed her skills through rigorous training and deployments, and developed her own style of leadership. Yet this moment crystallized the subtle distinctions she had often sensed but never fully appreciated. Leadership was not just about capability. It was about perception, timing, and the silent power of presence. Understood now that every joke, story, or anecdote must be calibrated, not just for effect, but for the audience and the situation. The Brigadier General concluded his remarks with a final statement that left the room in a state of quiet reflection. Leadership is a balance, he said. It is the intersection of authority, influence, and character. A leader must know when to inspire, when to instruct, and when to assert presence without words. That understanding distinguishes the good from the extraordinary. The officers, including, absorbed the weight of his message. The room, once filled with laughter and energy, now carried a sense of purpose and focus. Every officer felt the unspoken responsibility to carry these lessons forward in their own leadership journeys. Felt a mixture of relief and exhilaration. The tension that had gripped the room had passed, but its lesson remained vivid. She recognized the Brigadier General's brilliance, not just in his words, but in the way his presence and timing had imparted a lesson that would endure far longer than any direct critique. Humor remained her ally, but it was now tempered with a deeper understanding of when to deploy it and when to yield to authority. Knew this would shape her decisions, interactions, and the way she commanded respect for years to come. As the Brigadier General departed, officers instinctively straightened, murmuring quiet acknowledgments of respect. At the front of the room allowed herself a small, private exhale. She had witnessed in leadership, presence, and authority, and had internalized the lesson. Her humor and approachability, while still essential tools, now existed alongside a deeper awareness of timing, hierarchy, and perception. The tension had passed, but its impact was enduring. Knew she had crossed a threshold in her understanding of leadership, a threshold that would shape every story, joke, and command she delivered in the future. Returning to her role as facilitator, resumed the workshop with renewed focus. She guided officers through exercises, balancing engagement with attentiveness, humor with authority. The energy in the room was transformed, now tempered with reflection and purpose. She observed her peers, noticing how they carried themselves differently, inspired by the silent lessons of presence and authority they had witnessed. Understood now that leadership was not static, it was dynamic, situational, and profoundly human. Humor could inspire, but authority commanded. Presence, she realized, was the ultimate lesson. By the time the session concluded, had internalized the message fully. She walked from the workshop with a quiet sense of reflection and determination. Humor remained her tool, her bridge to those she led, but it would now be wielded with discretion and precision. She had experienced firsthand the power of presence, the weight of authority, and the subtle art of teaching without speaking a single name. The Brigadier General's visit had transformed the workshop, and in doing so, it had transformed her understanding of leadership forever. After the workshop ended and officers began filing out, lingered at the front of the room. Her mind still buzzed with the impact of Brigadier General Cole's presence. The lessons of timing, authority, and perception were clear, yet she knew that some nuances could only be conveyed in a private conversation. She hadn't expected it, but when Cole approached her, she realized the rare opportunity unfolding before her. "Captain Ward," he said, his voice steady but warm, carrying the authority she had come to respect. "Do you have a moment?" "Yes, sir," replied, standing. Her mind raced with anticipation, curiosity, and a subtle trace of nervousness. This was not a reprimand, she knew that, but it was a mentorship moment few junior officers were granted. She felt a mixture of excitement and humility. They stepped into a quieter hallway adjacent to the workshop, away from the lingering bustle of other officers. The Brigadier General's presence was still commanding, yet now it felt more personal, more direct. Observed him closely, the careful precision in his movements, the thoughtful cadence of his speech, and the understated confidence that radiated from every gesture. She had studied leaders, read books on strategy, and witnessed brilliance in the field, yet this encounter felt profoundly different. It was intimate, intentional, and deeply instructive. "Captain," he began, pausing to let his words land, "I want to commend you. Your workshop this morning demonstrated creativity, engagement, and the ability to inspire those under your charge. You are, without question, a capable and charismatic leader." Felt a small surge of pride but maintained her composure. Praise from someone like Cole was rare and valuable, and she knew this was both recognition and an opportunity to learn. He continued, his tone shifting slightly, more reflective, more instructive. "However, charisma alone does not define leadership. Influence is powerful, but it must coexist with presence and authority. Today, your humor opened the room, but my arrival highlighted the subtle balance required when commanding respect. You managed it well, but every leader must recognize the moments when levity serves, and when it must yield to authority." Nodded, absorbing the words carefully. They resonated deeply. She had sensed the tension and learned from it, yet hearing the lesson articulated in such a direct, personal way crystallized it further. Cole studied her closely, his piercing gaze assessing her response. Humor, engagement, and our strengths, he said. But do not mistake them for unassailability. Leadership is situational. A well-timed joke can inspire, but a poorly timed one can undermine. Authority, presence, and perception. These are the tools that will sustain your influence in any environment. Reflected on her own experiences. Boot camp, overseas deployments, high-stakes exercises, all situations where timing, awareness, and the subtle power of presence had dictated outcomes. She felt a quiet humility. Despite her accomplishments and the confidence she carried daily, this conversation reminded her that leadership was an evolving skill, a constant refinement of judgment, awareness, and influence. "Yes, sir," she said thoughtfully. "I understand, sir. I've seen it, felt it today. Presence and timing, they carry as much weight as skill or knowledge." Cole nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Leadership is more than capability, it is perception. Those you lead will mirror your confidence, composure, and judgment. Every action leaves an impression, intentional or not. Your ability to read the room, understand the dynamics, and adjust accordingly will define your effectiveness far more than any tactical decision alone." Took a deep breath, internalizing the weight of his words. She realized this was mentorship in its form, guidance not from a textbook, but from experience distilled into actionable insight. Paused for a moment, letting the lesson settle. Then his tone softened slightly, revealing a rare glimpse of personal encouragement. "Captain, you have the tools, the intelligence, and the temperament to rise further than many expect, but never lose sight of the subtle forces at play, the unseen influence of presence, the quiet authority that does not need to be announced. These qualities will distinguish you from the competent, elevating you to the extraordinary." Felt a surge of gratitude and determination. The Brigadier General's words were not just instruction, they were a challenge, a call to refine her abilities and embrace the full spectrum of leadership. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice steady, though her mind raced with reflection. "I appreciate your guidance and I'll take it to heart." Cole inclined his head, a subtle acknowledgement of both respect and expectation. "Good. Remember, leadership is never static. It is dynamic, responsive, and deeply human. Humility, awareness, and presence are as important as strategy or courage. Carry that with you, and you will inspire confidence, loyalty, and trust wherever you lead." Felt the words resonate deeply. She recalled her own backstory, the discipline instilled by her parents, the lessons of perseverance from her upbringing, the early training and deployments that had tested her in every imaginable way. Every experience had contributed to her skills, but this conversation distilled those lessons into a single, actionable framework. Humor, engagement, and empathy were invaluable, but without awareness, timing, and presence, they could falter. As they walked back toward the exit, Cole offered a final piece of guidance. "Captain Ward, continue to use your gifts, your humor, your approachability, but temper them with awareness and respect for context. You have a rare combination of qualities. Use them wisely. Influence is powerful, but presence is enduring." Nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle into her mind and body. She understood now that leadership was not a static skill, but a continuous refinement, a balance of intellect, empathy, and perception, shaped by experience, reflection, and mentorship. When they parted, felt a profound sense of clarity. The Brigadier General's visit had been transformative, elevating her understanding of leadership to a new level. She returned to her office, reviewing the morning in her mind, her humor, the workshop, the arrival of Cole, and their private conversation. Every detail was a lesson, every moment an opportunity to refine her approach. She knew that the path ahead would demand vigilance, awareness, and careful calibration, but she also felt a renewed confidence in her ability to rise to the challenge. Sitting at her desk, reflected on the delicate balance of leadership. Humor, approachability, and engagement remained vital tools, but now they were contextualized within a framework of authority, presence, and perception. She could navigate a room, inspire trust, and build camaraderie, yet she understood when to step back, when to assert authority, and when to let her presence speak without a word. This understanding, she realized, was the hallmark of a leader capable of extraordinary impact. Her thoughts returned to the workshop participants. The junior officers had witnessed not just her teaching but the interplay of presence, authority, and subtle mentorship. She hoped they had absorbed some of the lessons about timing, humility, and the silent power of influence. Knew that her role extended beyond instruction. She was also a model, demonstrating how humor, competence, and awareness could coexist, and how leadership could be both inspiring and disciplined. By the end of the day, felt a sense of resolve. The Brigadier General's guidance had illuminated both her strengths and areas for refinement. Leadership, she now understood more fully than ever, was a delicate balance, a continuous interplay of influence, authority, and perception. Humor and empathy would always be part of her approach, but they would be wielded with awareness, precision, and respect. She had been challenged, instructed, and inspired, and she knew the lessons would shape every decision, interaction, and command in the years to come. Left the base that evening with a sense of quiet determination. The lessons of the day, the workshop, the Brigadier General's presence, and their private conversation had coalesced into a singular truth. Leadership was a living, dynamic force, shaped not only by skill but by presence, timing, and awareness. She was ready to carry that understanding forward, to inspire confidence, command respect, and lead with the rare combination of humor, empathy, and unwavering authority. A week after the workshop, Captain Ward found herself facing a challenge that would test everything she had absorbed from both experience and mentorship. The morning sun had barely touched the horizon when her unit was called for an unexpected operational exercise, a scenario designed to simulate a high-pressure mission in a complex environment. While these exercises were standard, this particular drill had a twist. Junior officers and seasoned Marines alike were placed in situations requiring quick decision-making, coordination, and leadership under scrutiny. And the Brigadier General's lessons echoed in her mind like a silent compass. The unit gathered in the briefing room, tension palpable. Standing at the front, reviewed the operational map, her posture composed, voice calm. She could feel the subtle energy of her team, nervous excitement, anticipation, and the undercurrent of uncertainty that accompanies every high-stakes scenario. Her role was clear: lead, coordinate, and ensure her Marines could perform under pressure. Humor had always been her bridge, a way to ease tension and build trust, but today required a delicate balance. She reminded herself of the Brigadier General's words: presence, timing, and awareness would be just as crucial as skill. "Listen up," began, her voice confident yet approachable. "We're going to face unpredictable variables, unexpected challenges, and pressure that will test your instincts. Stay alert, communicate clearly, and remember, your decisions define your team's success. Let's move efficiently, but don't forget to watch out for each other." Her eyes swept across the room, meeting each Marine's gaze. A subtle nod here, a quick reassuring smile there, and she had established both authority and approachability, a balance she had honed over years of experience and reinforced by Cole's mentorship. The exercise began, simulating a scenario where the unit needed to secure a critical objective under time constraints and unpredictable interference. The team moved with precision, but soon faced a sudden, simulated ambush, unexpected obstacles that required immediate strategic decisions. Junior officers looked to her for guidance, some hesitating under the weight of responsibility. His mind raced. This was not just a test of tactical skill, it was a test of leadership, timing, and perception. She called out clear commands, concise and deliberate. "Flank left, maintain visual contact. Lieutenant Jackson, coordinate the team on the eastern perimeter. Everyone else adjust formation and cover the exit." Her words carried authority, but her tone remained measured, instilling confidence without inducing panic. Marines responded, executing orders efficiently, yet she observed closely for signs of hesitation, confusion, or morale dips. Leadership, she realized, was about guiding not just actions but emotions, perceptions, and confidence. As the scenario intensified, one of the junior officers, Lieutenant Jackson, faltered under pressure, a critical movement. A misstep could have compromised the simulated mission. Felt a familiar twinge. This was a moment she had prepared for, yet the Brigadier General's lessons echoed sharply. Authority and perception were as vital as decisions. She approached Jackson calmly, her voice firm yet encouraging. "Lieutenant, realign with your team, adjust the movement, and maintain visual contact. You're doing fine, trust your instincts, and lead with clarity." Her words combined instruction with reassurance, a perfect blend of command and mentorship. The unit recovered quickly and continued to navigate the exercise with a sharp eye, balancing humor where appropriate to ease tension. A well-placed quip about the simulated enemy's terrible taste in hiding spots drew a brief, tension-relieving laugh from her team, diffusing stress while reinforcing cohesion. Yet she carefully monitored timing, ensuring levity never undermined authority. Humor, she now understood fully, was not merely a social tool. It was a strategic instrument when wielded with precision. Midway through the exercise, another unexpected challenge arose. Communications were simulated to fail, forcing the team to adapt and coordinate without electronic guidance. Panic could have spread quickly, but composed presence anchored the unit. She issued calm, concise directives, demonstrating confidence through posture, tone, and decisive action. Marines followed instinctively, their respect and trust in her leadership evident in their seamless execution. Recognized the subtle interplay of presence and authority at work, just as the Brigadier General had taught. As the exercise concluded successfully, gathered her team for a debrief. The tension had transformed into pride and exhilaration. Marines exchanged smiles, some joking lightly, but all were focused on reflecting on their performance. Led the discussion with a balance of encouragement and critical evaluation. "Today demonstrated your capability, adaptability, and teamwork," she said. "Remember, leadership is about presence as much as decision-making. You inspire through clarity, confidence, and awareness. Let's continue to refine these skills, both individually and as a unit." Later, in a quiet moment after the exercise, reflected on the day's events. The simulated ambush, communication failure, and high-pressure decision points had tested not just her tactical skill but her leadership philosophy. She realized how deeply the Brigadier General's lessons had been integrated into her instincts. Humor timed appropriately could motivate, authority conveyed through presence could inspire confidence, and awareness of perception could prevent mistakes before they occurred. Leadership was now a holistic practice, blending intellect, empathy, and situational awareness into a coherent approach that guided both action and morale. Reflection extended beyond the immediate exercise. She considered how these principles could apply in real deployments, training scenarios, and daily leadership challenges. Authority, she realized, was not static. It was dynamic, responsive, and profoundly relational. Humor, empathy, and approachability remained essential tools, but their effectiveness depended on timing, context, and the perceptions of those being led. Her experience in the workshop with the Brigadier General had provided the theoretical framework. Today, the exercise had offered practical validation. She also thought about her own growth as a leader. The balance she now navigated, between authority and approachability, humor and seriousness, engagement and discipline, was rare and difficult to master. Her early career had taught her technical competence. Deployments had honed decision-making under pressure. Mentorship from the Brigadier General had refined her understanding of presence and perception. All these elements coalesced into the captain she had become, confident, respected, and capable of inspiring excellence in those around her. Knew the lessons of the day would extend beyond the exercise. She had been tested in real time, balancing multiple dimensions of leadership under pressure. Her team had responded, not just because of orders, but because of trust, respect, and confidence in her presence. Humor had facilitated engagement. Authority had ensured compliance. Situational awareness had prevented errors. The Brigadier General's teachings had manifested tangibly, and recognized that leadership was an evolving practice, one that required constant reflection, adaptation, and humility. That evening, as she reviewed the day, documented her observations, she reflected on what worked, what could be improved, and how the subtle balance of presence, humor, and authority had influenced outcomes. She considered her team's performance, identifying moments where confidence was inspired and moments where hesitation could have been mitigated. This reflection was part of her growth, a deliberate practice that complemented experience and mentorship. Leadership, she realized, was not a destination. It was a continuous process of refinement, learning, and adaptation. Also considered the broader implications for her career. The ability to inspire trust, balance humor with authority, and exercise situational awareness would distinguish her as a leader capable of handling increasingly complex challenges. The lessons of the Brigadier General were no longer abstract. They were integrated into her approach, validated through experience, and ready to be applied in both training and operational scenarios. She felt a renewed sense of purpose and confidence, knowing she could navigate the nuances of leadership with skill, insight, and presence. By the end of the day, had internalized the profound truth of leadership. It was a living, dynamic force shaped by skill, empathy, awareness, and authority. Humor remained a vital tool, but it was now wielded strategically, enhancing influence without undermining respect. Authority was conveyed not just through rank, but through presence, clarity, and decisiveness. And perception, the silent assessment of those being led, was perhaps the most powerful determinant of a leader's effectiveness. Had experienced firsthand the synthesis of these elements and emerged with a refined, holistic understanding of her role. Weeks had passed since the operational exercise, yet Captain Ward still reflected on every detail, every decision, and every lesson she had absorbed. The Brigadier General's presence and guidance, the workshop, and the high-pressure scenarios had all become integral threads in the tapestry of her leadership philosophy. What began as a playful approach to rank and humor had transformed into a profound understanding of balance between authority and approachability, strategy and perception, humor and seriousness. Now, she had the chance to see how those lessons resonated beyond her personal growth. The day began quietly, with the low hum of activity at the base. Had been invited to brief a visiting senior officer panel on the results of her unit's recent training exercises. The invitation alone was a mark of recognition, but it represented a deeper opportunity to demonstrate not only competence, but leadership refined by experience, mentorship, and self-awareness. As she walked toward the briefing room, she reflected on how far she had come, from the early days of rigorous training to this moment of influence and recognition. Inside the briefing room, officers and visiting dignitaries assembled, their attention fixed on the presentation ahead. The team had prepared meticulously, knowing that their performance reflected both their capabilities and the leadership that guided them. Captain Ward stood at the front, poised and composed. She took a deep breath, grounding herself in the lessons she had internalized. Presence, timing, and perception would speak as loudly as the content of her briefing. Humor, once a casual tool, would be used sparingly and intentionally to foster engagement without undermining authority. The presentation began, and its voice carried with clarity and confidence. She described the operational exercise, highlighting both successes and challenges, while integrating reflections on leadership and teamwork. She emphasized the human dimension, the importance of trust, morale, and cohesion under pressure. Her anecdotes were precise, well-timed, and subtly infused with humor, eliciting nods and light smiles without detracting from the gravity of the lesson. The audience was engaged, attentive, and responsive, reflecting the authority and presence she projected. At the conclusion of her briefing, one of the senior officers, a colonel with decades of experience, leaned forward. "Captain Ward," he said, voice measured but warm, "your leadership style is both effective and inspiring. The balance you strike between approachability and authority is rare, and your ability to integrate feedback, mentorship, and situational awareness demonstrates a level of maturity that exceeds your rank. Felt a subtle swell of pride, tempered by humility. Recognition from experienced leaders was meaningful, but it also carried responsibility to continue refining, growing, and setting an example for those she led. The colonel's words echoed what Brigadier General Cole had imparted weeks earlier. Reflected on that moment of private guidance, the subtle lessons in timing, presence, and authority. Cole had shown her that humor, empathy, and charisma were valuable tools, but their effectiveness was amplified or diminished by situational awareness. Today, in front of this panel, she saw the practical manifestation of those lessons. Her leadership was not just recognized, it was validated through the trust, respect, and confidence of her peers and superiors. As the briefing ended, the team gathered around her, their expressions a mix of pride, relief, and admiration. She looked at each Marine, seeing not only their capabilities but also the trust and loyalty they had placed in her. Leadership, she realized, was a shared experience, a dynamic interplay of guidance, influence, and mutual respect. Humor, clarity, and decisiveness had facilitated performance, but presence, perception, and timing had the cohesion that allowed the team to excel under pressure. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not merely in her own growth, but in the growth of those she led. Later, in a quiet moment alone, reflected on the journey that had led her here. She thought of her upbringing in Cleveland, the lessons of resilience and discipline instilled by her parents, and the early experiences that shaped her approach to responsibility and authority. She recalled the challenges of boot camp, deployments, and leadership exercises, the moments of failure and the lessons of humility. She remembered the workshop, the unexpected entrance of the Brigadier General, and the private conversation that had crystallized her understanding of presence, timing, and perception. Each experience had been a stepping stone, building the leader she had become. Also considered the subtle power of humor, which had once been her primary tool for connection. She now understood its strategic potential, a bridge to ease tension, foster trust, and inspire morale, but only when balanced with authority and awareness. Humor, like authority, could shape perception and influence outcomes. The Brigadier General had shown her that every interaction, joke, and gesture left an impression that could either reinforce or undermine leadership. Her growth lay not in abandoning her natural style, but in refining it, calibrating it to the demands of the moment and the expectations of those she led. The recognition she received that day extended beyond praise. It was a confirmation that her approach was effective, respected, and influential. Her team's performance, her ability to navigate complex scenarios, and her integration of mentorship and reflection demonstrated leadership that was both practical and principled. Understood that her journey was ongoing. Growth as a leader was never complete. Each day, each interaction, and each challenge offered an opportunity to refine her skills, strengthen her presence, and inspire those around her. Thoughts drifted to the future. She envisioned the challenges she would face, both operational and organizational, and the opportunities to mentor others as she had been mentored. The Brigadier General's lessons had not only transformed her own approach, they had provided a framework for guiding others, for fostering excellence, and for cultivating trust and cohesion in any team. She recognized that true leadership extended beyond rank. It was measured in influence, perception, and the ability to inspire growth in others. In that moment of reflection, felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The playful quips about rank, the laughter shared with her team, and the rigorous training exercises were all part of a journey that had refined her understanding of leadership. She had learned that authority was not just declared, it was embodied. Humor was not just entertainment, it was strategic. Presence was not just posture, it was a force that could inspire confidence, command respect, and shape outcomes. Each lesson, each experience, each mentor had contributed to the leader she had become. as she looked out across the base at her team training, felt a renewed sense of purpose. Leadership was dynamic, situational, and profoundly human. It required awareness, empathy, and the courage to balance approachability with authority. Her journey was far from complete, but she had reached a point where the lessons of the past, the guidance of mentors, and the experiences of her career converged into clarity. Humor, authority, presence, each had its place, and mastery lay in knowing how to wield them wisely. Smiled to herself, a quiet acknowledgement of her growth and the journey yet to come. She felt gratitude for the mentorship, the challenges, and the lessons that had shaped her. Brigadier General Cole had taught her that leadership was as much about perception and timing as it was about skill and knowledge. Today, her team, her peers, and her superiors had seen the manifestation of that wisdom in action. The room had been silenced by presence, but it had been inspired by leadership, a leadership she now understood in its fullest dimension. As the day ended and the sun dipped below the horizon, walked back to her quarters, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here and the path that lay ahead. The lessons of humor, authority, and presence would continue to guide her, shaping her decisions, interactions, and leadership style. She knew that every day would present new challenges, requiring judgment, awareness, and balance. But for the first time, she felt truly confident in her ability to navigate those challenges with skill, integrity, and insight. Captain Ward had begun her career as a capable, charismatic leader, relying heavily on humor and approachability. Through experience, mentorship, and reflection, she had transformed into a leader who could balance authority with empathy, presence with engagement, and strategy with perception. The Brigadier General's lesson, the power of presence, the weight of authority, and the subtle art of timing, had become an indelible part of her leadership philosophy. Now understood that true leadership was not about rank alone. It was about the careful orchestration of influence, perception, and human connection, a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her career.